I was sipping tea on my porch when the phone rang. "Mom?" Emily's voice came through flat and rehearsed. "We already got married yesterday. We only invited the people who really matter. Just send the beach house keys, okay? And please don't be dramatic." I smiled into the receiver, though my hand trembled. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, and hung up. 3 days later, I left a silver-wrapped package outside their apartment door, a wedding gift, so devastating that her brand-new husband, Brandon Harris, screamed until the neighbors opened their blinds to see what was wrong. If you're listening, don't forget to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because this story didn't begin with that phone call. It began 2 years ago with lasagna roses, and the first time Emily brought Brandon home. Back then, I was still Margaret Collins, 65 years old, retired nurse, proud mother of one brilliant daughter. Emily called me every day on her lunch breaks on her commutes when she couldn't sleep at night. We would laugh about her coworkers binge-watch the same Netflix shows and complain about Boston traffic. She was independent, strong-willed, and everything I had hoped she would become. So when she said she had met someone, I wanted to believe this was her chance at happiness. "Mom, he's different," she said, practically glowing. "He really gets me." I spent that afternoon preparing my famous lasagna, the one Emily had been requesting since she was 12. By the time the doorbell rang, the kitchen smelled of garlic and basil, of comfort and family tradition. Brandon Harris stepped in wearing an expensive suit and holding a bouquet of red roses. His smile was dazzling, the kind that made strangers swoon and skeptics suspicious. At the table, he asked about my nursing career, complimented the house, and praised my lasagna as though it had been prepared for a cooking show. He even insisted on helping with the dishes, sleeves rolled, charm dialed high. "Your mother raised an amazing daughter," he told Emily, hugging her in front of me. "You must be so proud, Mrs. Collins." I was proud. Emily had built a successful career in marketing, owned her own condo, and had never needed to lean on anyone. Pride, however, isn't blind. Something about Brandon's polish felt rehearsed, like he'd studied the script of Perfect Son-in-Law and was performing it to perfection. And then in between compliments, he mentioned my beach house. Once, twice, a third time before dessert. That house wasn't just property, it was memory. A little Cape Cod cottage where Emily learned to swim, where we spent every 4th of July barefoot in the sand, where we lit sparklers until our fingers turned sticky with melted marshmallows. William, my late ex-husband, and I had bought it 15 years ago before everything collapsed in the wake of his business losses. After he passed, the house became my sanctuary and Emily's too. So when Brandon, this stranger in a suit, couldn't stop referencing its value and potential, a chill passed through me. I brushed it off that night, convincing myself I was being protective. Emily deserved to be happy, and maybe this was her happiness. Still, I told my sister Diane the next morning. "He's very interested in our traditions," I said carefully. Diane laughed. "That's sweet, Margaret. It means he wants to be part of the family." I wanted to believe her. God, I really did. Looking back now, that dinner was the first red flag. The way his eyes flicked to the set of keys hanging by the kitchen door. The way he complimented Emily not for who she was, but for what she represented: success, stability, inheritance. At the time, though, I tucked my unease into the quiet corners of my mind. I told myself not to be one of those mothers who never thought anyone was good enough for her daughter. I told myself love can make people nervous, eager to impress. But the truth was written in Brandon's perfect smile. I'd seen it before years ago on William's ex-husband, who could charm an entire room until he emptied their wallets. A smile that wasn't affection, but strategy. And so the stage was set. 2 years before I wrapped that portfolio of documents with a white bow, 2 years before Brandon screamed like the devil himself had come knocking, the trap had already begun to close. All it took was a plate of lasagna, 3 compliments too many, and a beach house that carried not just memories, but a target painted bright as day. Before we dive into family betrayal stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. They tu hua di cha tu hua kumen vau tu hua odela. Her story. The weeks after that, dinner felt like watching the tide pull back from the shore. At first you don't notice. The water just seems a little farther away, the sand a little wider. But then you realize the whole ocean is moving, and you're left standing there wondering when exactly it slipped from your feet. Emily used to call me every day. Our conversations had been like morning coffee, comforting, dependable, essential. After Brandon came along, the calls shifted to every other day, then once a week until eventually my phone sat silent for stretches long enough to make me check if it was even working. When I did hear from her, the rhythm was different. She wasn't breezy or chatty anymore. She spoke in borrowed phrases, words that didn't sound like my daughter, but like echoes of someone else. Brandon thinks I should focus more on us. Brandon says, successful couples prioritize each other. Brandon read that spending too much time on family can actually hurt a marriage. Every sentence was another tide pulling her farther from me. I tried not to panic. She was 28 after all, independent, successful, perfectly capable of managing her own choices. I told myself this was normal part of a healthy relationship. Lovers always want to be each other's world at first. Hadn't I done the same when I met William? Hadn't I believed the sun rose and set with his approval until the day I realized the light was just smoke and mirrors? Still, there were moments that kept me awake at night. Like the Saturday Emily canceled our movie night because Brandon had surprised her with tickets to a networking event. Or the Sunday morning she cut our call short because Brandon thought she needed to save her emotional energy for the week ahead. Emotional energy. What kind of 28-year-old talks like that? When I raised it gently, Emily laughed. Mom, you're overthinking. Brandon just wants the best for me. He cares about balance. Balance. Another word that didn't sound like her. Emily had always been spontaneous, the kind of woman who could decide on a road trip at midnight or laugh until her sides ached over silly inside jokes. Now she sounded measured, edited, rehearsed. One evening I confided in Diane. We were sitting at her kitchen table drinking decaf tea, the kind of ritual that made me feel 12 years old again. She doesn't sound like herself, I admitted. It's like he's slowly rewriting her. Diane tapped her spoon against the mug. Margaret, new love changes people. Give it time. Maybe you're just not used to sharing her. The phrase pricked something tender in me. Maybe Diane was right. Maybe I was jealous of a man who had taken the daily calls, the inside jokes, the traditions that once belonged only to us. But underneath the jealousy was something sharper. Fear. Because it wasn't just that Emily was distracted. It was the way Brandon seemed to shape the narrative. He had opinions on her friends, too wild, too single, too distracting. He had critiques of her job, too demanding, not future-focused enough. And then eventually he had commentary about me. She says, you lean on her too much. Diane told me after running into Emily at the market one day that she feels responsible for your happiness. The words landed like stones. I'd spent decades making sure Emily never carried my burdens, working 2 jobs to keep her secure after William left, pretending I wasn't lonely, so she wouldn't feel guilty for having her own life. If anything, I'd bent over backward to keep her from being weighed down. Now Brandon had twisted even that into an accusation. I tried to talk to Emily about it. We were sitting in her condo one afternoon sipping wine while Brandon was at a meeting. Sweetheart, I said carefully, I hope you know you don't need to take care of me. I'm fine. She looked surprised. Of course, Mom. I never said otherwise, Diane mentioned. Her eyes narrowed. Brandon just thinks it's important that I set healthy boundaries. He doesn't want me to burn out from carrying other people's emotions. I nodded slowly. There it was again. Boundaries. Balance. Phrases lifted from some self-help seminar words meant to sound wise but sharpened into weapons against the people who actually loved her. I wanted to say, Emily, can't you hear yourself? Can't you see he's isolating you? But I didn't, because love, especially the new kind, can make people deaf to warnings and blind to red flags. I remembered how it felt when people tried to tell me William wasn't who I thought he was. I'd brushed them off too until the debts came due. So instead I smiled. If you're happy, then I'm happy. But I wasn't. I went home that night and stood in front of the beach house keys, hanging by the door. They glinted in the lamplight, small and ordinary, yet somehow the center of everything. I remembered Brandon's too-perfect smile, his rehearsed compliments, the way he'd lingered on that house like it was a prize instead of a memory. The tide was pulling my daughter farther and farther from me, and though I didn't know it then, I would soon have to decide stand by silently while she drowned or wade in, even if it meant facing the storm head-on. It happened on a Wednesday morning, one of those ordinary days when life decides to blindside you. I was reorganizing my linen closet, folding sheets, humming to myself, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was Facebook. Emily had posted a photo. Her left hand filled the screen, a diamond the size of a marble glittering on her ring finger. The caption read, "He asked, I said yes. Can't wait to start our forever together. 53 likes and counting, dozens of comments, co-workers, college friends, acquaintances all congratulating her. So happy for you, beautiful ring. You two are perfect. Not one mention of me, because why would they? They must have assumed I already knew. But I didn't. My coffee grew cold as I stared at the photo. My daughter was engaged, and I had learned about it the same way strangers had. I dialed her number with trembling hands. She answered on the second ring, breathless, excited. "Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry. It just happened last night. Brandon surprised me at our favorite restaurant. It was so romantic. I was going to call you this morning, I swear." "Congratulations, sweetheart." I managed forcing warmth into my voice. "Tell me everything." And she did. For 20 minutes she gushed. The candlelight, the violinist, the ring he'd picked, how Brandon's parents had immediately started planning an engagement party at their country club. Her voice was bubbling unbroken like a champagne fountain that wouldn't stop flowing. Finally, I asked the question I dreaded. "When's the engagement party?" There was a pause. "Next Saturday." "Should I plan to drive down Friday night?" I asked. The silence stretched longer this time. "Mom, about that. Trevor's family, sorry, Brandon's family, has very specific traditions. His mother has already planned everything. It's really just for his side of the family and a few close friends." The words hit me like ice water down my spine. "So I'm not invited." "It's not that you're not important," Emily rushed. "It's just, his mom is very traditional. Brandon thinks it's better if we respect their customs. We'll do something special, just the three of us soon. I promise." I kept my voice calm, though my throat ached. "I see. And what do you think, Emily?" Another pause. Then softly, "I think Brandon knows his family better than I do. I want to start off on the right foot with them. You understand, right?" "Understand." That word again. A polite command dressed as a request. "Of course," I said, steady as I could. "Whatever makes you happy." She sighed with relief as though she'd just passed a test. We hung up, and I stood there in my kitchen staring at the keys to the beach house hanging on the hook by the door, wondering how many more tests I was supposed to fail in order to keep my daughter. The following Saturday, while Emily celebrated her engagement with Brandon's family, I stayed home. I baked a pie. I watered my roses. I told Diane I was fine when she called, though my voice cracked once. "It's just one event," Diane soothed. Maybe they wanted it small, but it wasn't just one event. It was a pattern. First the phone calls that faded, then the boundaries that became walls. Now an engagement party where the bride's own mother had no seat at the table. It felt less like tradition and more like erasure. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch listening to the waves crash against the shore. The beach house had always been our place, mine and Emily's. Now I imagined Brandon standing here making plans that had nothing to do with memories and everything to do with property values. I tried to picture Emily in her dress glowing with happiness, but the image blurred with another, her sitting quietly beside him, echoing his words, dimming her own light so he could shine. I whispered into the night air. She used to call me every day, and the sea, steady and relentless, whispered back, "Not anymore." If being left out of the engagement party had felt like a slap, then the months that followed were more like a slow, steady freezing over, a cold silence creeping into places where warmth used to live. Emily would mention wedding details the way you mention the weather, casually as if they barely mattered. "Oh, we booked a photographer. We've chosen the flowers. Brandon's mother has a friend who knows someone at the venue." Each update was a sentence dropped in passing, never an invitation to join the conversation. I offered gently at first. "Would you like me to help with the dress shopping?" "Oh, Brandon's mom already booked appointments. I could look at cake vendors with you. Brandon's handling that part. What about the guest list? Should I send names from our side of the family?" "Oh, it's mostly his family. You understand, right?" That phrase again, "you understand." It was less a question than a script one I was expected to read my lines from. I tried to remind myself that weddings have changed. Maybe I was outdated, still clinging to traditions that didn't matter anymore. But then I'd see photos on Instagram Emily in a white boutique dress, her future mother-in-law beaming at her side, captioned with hashtags like #blessed, #sayyes, #future Mrs. Harris. And I would remember how when she was a child, Emily used to run barefoot through the Cape Cod sand, a towel wrapped like a veil around her hair. "When I get married, I want it here," she'd declare. "Fairy lights on the dunes. Mom, just you, me and the ocean." Now she was being fitted for a gown I hadn't seen in a boutique I wasn't invited to, dreaming someone else's dream. 3 months before the wedding, I asked about the date again. I need to put in for time off at the library, I explained. We're thinking early October, Emily said. Probably the second weekend. Brandon's researching venues. October in New England is beautiful, I said, hopeful. Were you thinking of the beach house? You always wanted to. Oh no, Mom. Her voice cut me off. Brandon wants something more elegant, more sophisticated than a backyard beach wedding. The dismissal stung more than I expected, not because of the beach house itself, but because of what it represented, our shared dream cast aside as childish. Of course, I said quietly. Whatever makes you happy. But it didn't feel like happiness. It felt like exclusion wrapped in politeness. When I tried to help, I was met with vague responses. When I asked questions, I was told it was already decided. I began to feel like an elderly aunt who had to be humored, not a mother who had raised her child alone through every storm, every scraped knee, every heartbreak. The holidays were the worst. Trevor's sorry Brandon thinks it would be healthier if we spent Christmas with his family this year, Emily told me over the phone. Healthier, that word again. We had spent every Christmas together since William left. Pajamas until noon, hot chocolate by the tree presents, opened slowly while the ocean roared outside. Those mornings were our anchor proof that even after abandonment and loss, we still had each other. Now even that was being rewritten. Diane tried to console me. Margaret, maybe you're taking it too personally. Weddings bring out the worst in people sometimes. But it wasn't just the wedding. It was the erasure. 1,000 small cuts, each one, leaving me less visible, less necessary, less wanted. I found myself standing in front of the beach house one evening, the salty air heavy on my tongue. I ran my hand along the weathered wood of the porch rail, remembering the summers when Emily and I would sit here with dripping ice cream cones, watching fireworks explode above the water. She had once sworn she would say her vows here barefoot with fairy lights strung between the dunes. Now she was saying them somewhere I wasn't even allowed to stand. I whispered into the wind. How did we get here? The waves rolled in steady and merciless, as if to answer one boundary at a time. And though I didn't know it yet, the coldness I felt that night was only the beginning. Brandon hadn't just claimed the wedding planning. He was slowly rewriting Emily's entire story and erasing me from the pages. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. It was a Tuesday evening when the call came, one of those ordinary nights that end up carving themselves into memory. I was in the middle of reorganizing my linen closet. Again, it seemed I was always keeping my hands busy these days when my phone rang. Emily's name lit the screen, and for a moment joy bloomed in me. Hi, sweetheart, I answered brightly. Her voice was careful, almost mechanical. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be cool about it. I froze. Nothing good ever follows that kind of preface. Of course, I said softly. What is it? Brandon's been reading about family dynamics and healthy boundaries. She began, words tumbling out like lines rehearsed in front of a mirror. He thinks it's really important we establish our independence as a couple from the very beginning. A chill crept down my spine. What kind of independence? Well, she hesitated. He pointed out that I've been relying on you emotionally for most of my life, like calling you when I'm stressed or turning to you instead of working through things with my partner. He says that could create problems in our marriage. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Emily, talking to your mother when you're upset isn't unhealthy. It's normal. It's love. But is it? She pressed. Brandon showed me articles about women who prioritize their mothers over their husbands. Those marriages usually fail. I don't want to be that wife, Mom. Her words were daggers, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. So what does this mean practically? It means, she said slowly, less frequent contact. More space for Brandon and me to build our own traditions. My throat tightened. And the holidays. Another pause. Brandon thinks it would be healthier if we spent Christmas with his family this year just to break the pattern. Christmas. The holiday we had never missed, not once, since William walked out on us. Pajamas until noon, hot cocoa by the tree, the ocean as our backdrop. Our tradition, our time. I kept my voice steady, though. My heart cracked. I see. Anything else? Yes. She hesitated, then plunged forward. Brandon thinks the beach house situation is complicated. A stone dropped into my stomach. What about the beach house? You know, I've always assumed I'd inherit it someday. But Brandon pointed out that puts a lot of pressure on us. He feels like he can never truly relax there, because it isn't ours, it's yours. And if something happened between us and you, we'd lose it. I swallowed hard. Are you asking me to sign the house over to you? Not exactly, she said quickly. Brandon just thinks it would be better if we found our own place. somewhere that's truly ours. He doesn't want to feel like he's constantly under scrutiny from you when we're supposed to be relaxing. Under scrutiny. From meth woman who had barely seen him more than a handful of times in the past year. Emily, I whispered that house has been in our family for 15 years. It's where you learned to swim, where you spent every summer of your childhood. It's not just a vacation spot, it's our history. I know, Mom, and I treasure those memories. But I'm starting a new family now. I need new memories, new traditions. New traditions. Words that sounded noble but felt like nails hammering me out of her life. After the call, I sat on my bed in silence. My hands were cold, despite the warmth of the room. I thought about how predators work not just in crime shows, but in real life. They isolate you from your support system, make you believe the people who truly love you are burdens instead of lifelines. They rewrite the definition of love until dependence feels toxic and control feels like care. Brandon wasn't just building boundaries, he was building walls brick by brick, phrase by phrase, until Emily was on his side and I was left outside staring at locked gates. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to Boston, pound on their door, and drag her back to reality. But I didn't, because I knew if I pushed too hard, I'd only drive her closer to him. So I did what mothers have always done when their children drift away. I smiled through the phone, told her I respected her decisions, and hung up. Then I sat in my quiet house, staring at the keys to the beach house glinting on the hook by the door. They seemed to mock me, a reminder that what was once a sanctuary had become a bargaining chip in someone else's game. But somewhere in that silence resolve began to take root. If Brandon thought he could erase me from my daughter's life, he had underestimated the wrong woman. The walls he built might be tall, but I had spent a lifetime finding ways through. The phone rang on a quiet Tuesday evening while I was folding towels. Emily's name lit the screen, and for a split second, my heart lifted the way it always used to. I thought maybe she just wanted to talk about her day, about nothing at all, the way we once did. But her voice was different, careful, almost rehearsed. "Mom," she began, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be cool about it." I laughed softly, though my chest tightened. "That sounds serious. What is it, sweetheart?" She took a breath. "Brandon's been reading about family dynamics. He thinks it's important that we set healthy boundaries now before bad habits form. Like, I can't keep leaning on you for everything. It might cause problems in our marriage." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Leaning on me. My daughter had been strong and independent since the day she walked into her first job interview in a navy blue suit. If anything, I had leaned on her laughter, her energy, her presence. "Emily," I said carefully, "talking to your mother when you're upset isn't unhealthy. It's normal. It's love." "I know," she said quickly, but Brandon showed me articles about women who ruin marriages by putting their moms first. I don't want to be that wife. My throat tightened. "So what are you saying?" She hesitated, then answered in the voice of someone quoting another, less frequent contact. "More space for me and Brandon to build our own traditions." The words hit me harder than I expected. For years, tradition had meant Christmas mornings in pajamas, hot cocoa by the fire, and the ocean just beyond the frosted windows. It had meant the two of us choosing joy when the world gave us sorrow. And the holidays, I asked quietly, already fearing the answer. "Brandon thinks it would be healthier if we spent Christmas with his family this year, just to break the pattern." The pattern? That was what she called it. Not a ritual, not a bond, not a comfort. A pattern, something unhealthy, something to break. I forced my voice to stay calm. "I see. Anything else?" She drew in another breath. "Yes, about the beach house." My heart sank. "What about it?" "Well, she said I've always assumed I'd inherit it. But Brandon thinks that puts pressure on us. He says he can't relax there because it's not really ours, it's yours. And if something happened between us and you, we'd lose it." The words were knives dressed as reason. "Are you asking me to sign it over?" I asked more sharply than I intended. "No. Not exactly." She rushed to soften it. "He just thinks we should find our own place, somewhere that belongs to us. He doesn't want to feel like we're under your scrutiny." Scrutiny. From me, the woman who had barely seen him half a dozen times all year. I gripped the phone. "Emily, that house isn't just property. It's where you learned to swim, where you roasted marshmallows on the 4th of July. It's where we became a family after your father left. It holds every memory we've built together." "I know, Mom. I do. And I'll always treasure that. But I'm starting a new family now with Brandon. I need new memories, new traditions." Her voice was earnest, but all I heard was someone else's script. "I understand," I whispered, though I didn't. if that's what you need." She sighed in relief as though she'd passed another test. "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd get it." When the call ended, I sat in the dark phone still in my hand. I could hear the ocean faintly through the window, steady as it had always been, but nothing inside me felt steady anymore. I thought of predators, the kind I'd studied in nursing seminars, the ones who isolate their victims not with violence but with suggestion. They convince you that your support system is a cage, that your lifeline is a chain, that control is love and love is control. Brandon was building something, not boundaries, walls. And every time Emily repeated his words, those walls grew higher, shutting me out of her life. I wanted to scream, to storm into their apartment and tell her what was happening. But I knew if I pushed too hard, she'd only cling to him more. That's how it works. The more you warn, the more the victim believes you're the enemy. So I stayed quiet. I told her I respected her choices. I smiled through the phone. And then I set it down and let the silence close in around me. That night, I stood in front of the keys to the beach house, glinting under the lamplight. They weren't just metal and brass. They were a symbol of everything Brandon wanted to take: our memories, our independence, our bond. He thought he was winning. He thought he was dismantling me piece by piece, mother by mother, until I was nothing more than an obstacle removed. But as I stared at those keys, something inside me hardened. Brandon Harris had underestimated the wrong woman. After that phone call about boundaries and the beach house, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the ocean pound against the shore, each wave a reminder that something relentless was at work in my daughter's life. By morning, I had made a decision. If Brandon thought he could isolate Emily and erase me from her world, then I needed to know exactly who he was. I couldn't fight shadows anymore. I needed light. I called my sister Diane first. She lived 30 miles inland in a modest ranch house filled with the scent of lavender and cinnamon. When I arrived that afternoon, she had tea waiting. "You look tired," she said, pressing a warm mug into my hands. "I am," I admitted. Emily barely talks to me anymore. When she does, it's like she's reading from one of Brandon's lectures. And now he's hinting about the beach house, saying he feels scrutinized there, as if that little cottage is some kind of threat. Diane frowned. "That doesn't sound like love. That sounds like control." "I know." My throat tightened. But how do I prove it? If I tell Emily, she'll think I'm jealous. He's too smart to leave obvious bruises. Diane was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Then you stop listening to his performance and start looking at the man behind it." Those words lit something in me. 2 days later, I was sitting across from a private investigator in a small office above a hardware store in Boston. His name was Mark Dwyer, a graying man with a quiet voice and eyes that missed nothing. "You're not the first mother who's walked in here worried about a son-in-law," he said. "But you might be the first who's willing to pay out of her own pocket to find the truth." "Emily is all I have," I told him simply. "If he's clean, I'll sleep easier. If he's not..." I didn't finish. I didn't need to. Mark nodded and took down Brandon's full name, date of birth, and the scraps of information I'd gathered: his supposed consulting business, his polished resume, the expensive clothes he somehow always afforded. "Give me a week," he said. It didn't even take that long. 5 days later, Mark called me back. "Mrs. Collins, I think you'll want to see this in person." When I arrived, he slid a thin folder across the desk. Inside were names, photographs, and notes that made my stomach lurch. Brandon Harris, Mark said, isn't new to this. 2 years ago, he was engaged to a woman named Emma Peterson. Her family owns a chain of restaurants in Seattle. Engagement ended abruptly when her father discovered Brandon's gambling debts. He'd been trying to convince Emma to put him on her bank accounts. I flipped the page with shaking fingers. A smiling young woman stared back at me from a photo. And before that, Mark continued, there was Sarah Mitchell, trust fund from her grandparents. Same story, he isolated her, discouraged contact with friends and family, then tried to gain access to her assets. Her brothers intervened before the wedding. Brandon disappeared overnight. I swallowed hard. So it's a pattern. Predators always follow patterns, Mark said quietly. Charm, isolation, access. Once they've drained the victim, they move on. The air in the office felt heavy, like lead pressing on my chest. Driving home, I kept seeing Emily's face. Her bright eyes dimmed, her laughter replaced with carefully measured phrases. She wasn't just drifting away. She was being pulled under the way a riptide drags swimmers out past the breakers before they realize what's happening. And now I knew the truth. Brandon wasn't just a charming husband with quirks. He was a predator, a man who had already done this before, who had perfected his routine on other women, who had likely set his sights on Emily the moment he learned about me, about the beach house, about our history. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the fear inside me had hardened into resolve. I wasn't going to sit back and let my daughter become another line in a private investigator's folder. If Brandon Harris thought he was clever, he was about to learn what happens when you underestimate a mother who has already survived heartbreak, betrayal, and loss. I tucked Mark's folder into the drawer beside my bed. The evidence was there. Now I just needed to decide how and when to use it. It was a Wednesday morning when the phone rang. I was in the garden pruning roses, trying to quiet my thoughts after nights spent staring at the folder Mark Dwyer had given me. Proof of Brandon's pattern lay tucked in my nightstand drawer, whispering to me every time I passed the bedroom door. When I saw Emily's name flash across my phone, hope flickered despite everything. Maybe she wanted to talk. Maybe she had noticed the cracks herself. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, brushing dirt from my gloves. Her voice was flat, almost businesslike. "Mom, I wanted you to hear it from me before you saw it online. Brandon and I got married yesterday." The pruning shears slipped from my hand and landed in the dirt. "Yesterday?" "Yes," she said briskly. "We decided a big wedding was too commercial. We found a lovely venue in Martha's Vineyard and kept it simple, just immediate family and close friends." "Immediate family, except for me." I forced my voice to stay calm. "I thought the wedding was planned for October." "Plans changed," she said. Her tone clipped. It was perfect. Brandon's parents were there. His sister flew in. Tom was best man. Jessica was my maid of honor. She recited the details like she was reading a grocery list. Not once did she say my name. "I see," I whispered. "Congratulations. I'm sure it was beautiful." "Thanks." Her voice softened for a moment, then hardened again. "Oh, and Brandon and I were wondering if you could send us the keys to the beach house. Since we didn't plan a honeymoon, we thought we'd spend some time there." The audacity of it made me grip the phone tighter. The beach house, our sanctuary, our history reduced to a convenient Airbnb for the man who had cut me out of my own daughter's wedding. The keys, I repeated slowly. "Yes, Brandon's really excited to see it. I've told him so much about it over the years. He's particularly interested in the renovations and the property value." "Property value? How romantic." I let the silence stretch until even she seemed uncomfortable. "Emily, when you say you got married, do you mean legally married, license and all?" "Yes, of course. We got the license last week." She sighed as if I were dragging the conversation out unnecessarily. "Mom, please don't make this dramatic. We've talked about boundaries. I thought you'd understand." "Understand? Always that word." "I understand perfectly," I said, my tone calm, measured. Inside, though, something hardened into resolve, because I did understand. I understood that Brandon had succeeded in isolating Emily, convincing her that cutting me out of her own wedding was healthy. I understood that every tradition, every connection we had built was being dismantled. And I understood that if I stayed silent, he would eventually get what he wanted, access to her assets, to the beach house, maybe even to her inheritance. But I also understood something Brandon did not. He thought I was powerless. He thought I was just another mother too timid to fight back. He had no idea who he was dealing with. "Of course, sweetheart," I said softly. "I'll make sure you get the keys." We ended the call, and I sat on the garden bench, staring at my roses. Their petals were delicate, but their thorns sharp enough to draw blood. A fitting metaphor. For 2 years, I had watched quietly as Brandon built his walls around Emily brick by brick. Now he had sealed the gate with a wedding ring and dared me to hand him the keys to everything else. But what he didn't know was that I had already begun collecting bricks of my own evidence testimonies history, proof of who he was and what he had done to other women before my daughter. And if he wanted keys, then I would give him something far more powerful. That evening I sat at my kitchen table, Mark's folder open before me, and began making calls to lawyers, to contacts I hadn't spoken to in years, to people who remembered the old stories about William Collins and his ruined business partner. By the time I was done, I had the beginnings of a plan. Not revenge, not really. Justice. The kind of justice that doesn't shout, but whispers. The kind that sits quietly in a box wrapped in silver paper with a neat white bow. A wedding gift, the sort no one forgets. As the sun sank behind the ocean, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange, I whispered to myself, "You made a mistake, Brandon. You underestimated a mother." The roses nodded in the evening breeze, their thorns catching the last of the light. And for the first time in months, I smiled, because the game had changed. And this time, I wasn't going to play by his rules. The night after Emily's call, I pulled Mark Dwyer's folder from my nightstand and spread the contents across my kitchen table. Newspaper clippings, Old photographs, financial records, pieces of a puzzle that had once ruined my life, now threatening to ruin my daughter's. I made a pot of coffee and began reading through everything again. Mark had been thorough, but there was one detail that stuck with me: the name Morrison. William Morrison, Brandon's grandfather. It rang a bell buried deep in memory. My late ex-husband, William Collins, used to curse that name after the collapse of a real estate deal in the late 1980s. Morrison had been his partner until money disappeared from their joint accounts. I remembered long nights of arguments, lawyers at our kitchen table, the crushing weight of bankruptcy that followed. And now, decades later, the grandson of that same man had walked into my daughter's life with a dazzling smile and the same greedy hands. Coincidence number patterns don't lie. The next morning, I called Patricia Winters, a lawyer who had once handled parts of William's estate. She still worked at the same firm in Boston, her voice brisk but warm when she recognized mine. "Patricia, I need records from the Collins-Morrison development deal, 1987 to 1993, I told her. "Digging up ghosts?" "Margaret," she asked gently. "Not ghosts," I said. "Predators." By noon, she had sent me scans of court documents and deposition notes. Morrison had embezzled over $2 million, fled to Florida, and left William to take the fall. The stress had destroyed our marriage long before the divorce papers were signed. The final document chilled me: a newspaper article from 1993. William Morrison had confessed on his deathbed that he'd hidden the stolen money in offshore accounts and passed the knowledge to his grandson, Brandon. The pieces clicked into place. Brandon hadn't stumbled into Emily's life. He had targeted her. The beach house, the inheritance. He knew exactly what he wanted, just as his grandfather had known. By Friday, I had assembled everything. A leather portfolio, the kind lawyers use in court, filled with photocopies and affidavits. Records of Brandon's broken engagements to Emma Peterson and Sarah Mitchell. Bank statements linking him to offshore accounts. And the article connecting the Morrison family's sins directly to my late husband's downfall. Brandon carried his mother's last name, Harris, but his grandfather was William Morrison. Yes, that Morrison. At the very front, I tucked a set of keys, the beach house keys. A gift wrapped inside the truth. Finally, I wrote a note on cream-colored stationery. "Congratulations on your marriage. Every husband should know his wife's family history. Consider this a gift from me to you, one that will last longer than roses or champagne. With love, Margaret." I placed the portfolio into a silver gift box, tied it with a white satin bow, and stepped back. It looked elegant, innocent, almost festive. No one would guess the storm waiting inside. That afternoon, I drove to their apartment complex in Boston. The city buzzed with Friday energy horns, honking couples laughing on sidewalks, delivery bikes weaving between cars. I parked across the street box, balanced on the passenger seat, my hands steady in a way they hadn't been for months. Walking up the stairs, I felt a strange calm. This wasn't revenge, it wasn't spite. It was a mother's duty to arm her daughter with the truth, even if it came wrapped in paper and ribbon. At their door, I set the box down carefully. The silver gleamed under the hallway light, the bow, perfect the note, propped neatly on top. I didn't knock. I didn't linger. I simply turned and walked away, each step lighter than the last. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Diane. "Everything okay?" I smiled faintly and typed back, "It will be soon." That evening, as the sun set over Cape Cod, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea. The waves whispered against the shore, steady and timeless, as though reminding me that truth, too, is relentless. At 2:17 p.m. the next day, my phone rang. Emily's number, but Brandon's voice ragged and furious. "What the hell is wrong with you, you crazy old witch?" he screamed. "How dare you send us this garbage?" I set my teacup gently on its saucer. "Hello, Brandon. I take it you opened your wedding gift." "This isn't funny. This is harassment. I'm calling the police." I let my voice stay calm, almost sweet. "Oh, I'm confused. What exactly would you report that your mother-in-law gave you a gift box full of public records and newspaper articles, that she introduced you to your own family history?" Behind him, I could hear Emily's muffled voice trembling, asking what was going on. Brandon swore again, his voice breaking into panic. I leaned back in my chair, watching the waves. "Enjoy the beach house keys, Brandon. Consider them my blessing. I'm sure the ocean will be a wonderful place for you and Emily to talk about the past and the future." Then I hung up my hand, steady, my heart calmer than it had been in years, because the wedding gift had been delivered. And once the truth is unwrapped, it can never be put back in the box. 2 days passed after Brandon's screaming call. Emily didn't ring, didn't text, didn't post a single filtered photo of newlywed bliss. The silence was heavier than any words. Then on Sunday morning, I heard Ita hesitant knock at my door. When I opened it, Emily stood there like a ghost, still in the same jeans and blouse I'd last seen her wear online, her hair unwashed, her eyes red and swollen. She clutched a manila folder tight against her chest. "Tell me everything," she said. No greeting, no smile, just raw desperation. I stepped aside and she walked in without waiting for permission. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd once spread her homework, where we'd mapped her college dreams. Now it held only coffee cups and the weight of truth. She broke first. "Trevor Brandon left yesterday. Packed 2 suitcases, turned off his phone. He said you were poisoning our marriage with lies, that if I believed you over him, we weren't meant to be together." Her voice cracked, but there was no self-pity, only exhaustion. I reached across and covered her hand with mine. That's classic manipulation. Give the victim an ultimatum, make them believe they're responsible for the relationship's collapse. She swallowed hard. "I didn't believe him, not this time, because—" Her fingers trembled as she slid the folder open. "Because I found these." Inside were printed emails. Correspondence between Brandon and a man named Marcus Webb discussing offshore accounts and maintaining access to Morrison inheritance funds. The date stretched back 2 years, long before Emily had even met him. I scanned the pages slowly, then looked at her. "You went through his things?" She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "After he stormed out, I opened his laptop. He was sloppy, he left everything logged in." "Mom, he planned this, from the start. I was never a wife. I was a target." Her voice hardened as she continued. "I called Emma Peterson, the woman from your Investigator's report. She told me everything, how he isolated her, tried to get access to her accounts, even convinced her to write a will in his favor. When her father found out Brandon disappeared overnight, Emily pulled out her phone, showing me text messages. Emma put me in touch with Sarah Mitchell, too. Same story, Mom. Exact same playbook. I wasn't special. I was just next." My heart twisted at the sight of Hermie, brilliant, independent daughter, reduced to trembling confessions. I squeezed her hand. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry." She shook her head. "Don't apologize. You tried to warn me, and I didn't listen. I chose him over you. I cut you out of my own wedding. I made you the enemy because he told me to." Her shoulders sagged. "I was so stupid." "No," I said firmly. "You weren't stupid. You were manipulated by a professional predator. Smart women are the ones they go after. You had something he wanted. That's not weakness, it's proof of your worth." For a long moment, the only sound was the tick of the kitchen clock. Then Emily lifted her chin, and I saw a flash of something I hadn't seen in years steal. "I'm going to destroy him," she whispered. Her words startled me, but not because of their sharpness, because they weren't spoken from spite, but from clarity. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. She straightened, wiping her tears. "I mean, I'm done being his victim. I have proof. I have his emails, his fake business documents, the testimonies of other women. And I have you. He underestimated us both." I felt a slow smile spread across my face. For the first time in 2 years, we were no longer divided by his walls. We were on the same side of the table, mother and daughter allies. "Then tell me what you need," I said. Her eyes locked onto mine. "Help me take him down. Not just for me, for Emma, for Sarah, for anyone else he's ever targeted." I nodded. "We'll do it together." As we sat there, sunlight spilled across the table, illuminating the old photographs pinned on the wall behind her. Pictures of Emily as a child, laughing at the beach house sand in her hair, joy in her eyes. That little girl was still there, buried, bruised, but not broken. Brandon thought he'd stolen her completely. He was wrong, because now she wasn't just my daughter. She was a fighter, and together we were about to make sure his empire of lies collapsed brick by brick the way he'd tried to dismantle us. 3 days after I left the wedding gift at their door, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in months. A knock that carried hesitation instead of confidence. When I opened the door, Emily stood there like a child caught in the rain, makeup-smeared hair, tangled, eyes swollen from sleepless nights. She didn't hug me. She didn't smile. She just said, "Tell me everything." I stepped aside. She came in and sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the same spot where she'd once practiced spelling words, where she'd filled out college applications. Now she sat hunched, clutching a manila folder as if it were a life raft. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "He left, Mom. Brandon walked out yesterday, said you were poisoning me with lies. Said if I couldn't believe him over you, maybe our marriage wasn't meant to last. I poured her coffee, set it in front of her. She wrapped her hands around the mug like it was the only thing keeping her warm. He gave you an ultimatum, I said softly. That's what manipulators do. They make you believe the failure is your fault. Emily's jaw trembled. But then I looked through his desk. His laptop. Mom, he wasn't even careful. She slid the folder across the table. I found emails, records, offshore accounts. He's been planning this for years before he even met me. I opened the folder. Printed emails between Brandon and a man named Marcus Webb, full of references to inheritance funds and maintaining access. Some messages dated 2 years before that night. Emily spilled coffee on him at a cafe the night she thought was fate. Her voice hardened as she continued. I called Emma Peterson. She told me how he isolated her, convinced her to add him to her accounts, even had her draft a will leaving everything to him. When her father found out Brandon disappeared overnight, Emily pulled out her phone, scrolling to another thread. Emma gave me Sarah Mitchell's number. Same story, same pattern, same lies. I reached across the table and held her hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Don't be. You tried to warn me. I didn't listen. I chose him over you. I cut you out of my own wedding because he told me to. Her voice broke. I don't know how to forgive myself. I squeezed her hand tighter. Listen to me. You weren't stupid. You were targeted. Predators don't go after the weak. They go after women with something worth stealing. Your independence, your career, your future. He didn't choose you because you were naive. He chose you because you shine. Her chin lifted slightly, though tears still glistened in her eyes. For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the clock ticking on the wall. Then she spoke low and fierce. I'm going to destroy him. The word startled me, but when I looked at her, I saw not despair, but steel. She wasn't broken. She was furious. What do you mean? I asked carefully. She sat up straighter. I mean, I won't be another name in his list. I have proof now. I have his emails, his documents, Emma and Sarah's testimonies. He thinks he married a victim, but he married a woman who still has a mother willing to fight. Something inside me swelled with pride. For 2 years he had worked to turn her against me brick by brick. Now those bricks were crumbling. Then tell me what you need, I said. She looked me straight in the eye. I need your help. Not just to protect me, but to make sure he never does this to anyone else again. I knotted my throat tight. Then we'll fight together. Sunlight slanted through the window, falling across the table where our hands rested side by side. For years, Brandon had tried to pull them apart. Now they were joined again, stronger for the scars. As Emily wiped her tears and began to outline what she had found, I thought of the girl who used to run barefoot on the Cape Cod sand veil of towels trailing behind her. That girl was still here. Bruised, yes, but unbroken. Brandon had underestimated me, but his real mistake was underestimating her. Because now my daughter wasn't just surviving. She was ready to fight. And together we were going to end him. When Emily finally stopped shaking, we sat in silence at the kitchen table, hands still linked. It was the kind of silence that doesn't empty a room, it fills it. For the first time in years, I felt like we were breathing in rhythm again. She pulled the manila folder closer. Mom, this isn't enough. He's slippery. He'll spin these emails, say they're old misinterpreted. I need more. We need to trap him in his own words. I nodded slowly. Then we make him talk. The next morning, we drove together to Boston to meet Patricia Winters. She greeted us in a gray suit, her sharp eyes softening when she saw Emily. I was afraid I'd be meeting you alone, Margaret Patricia said. I'm glad you came. Emily straightened. I need to know the truth. Legally, financially, all of it. No more blind spots. Patricia spread papers across her desk. Here's what we know. Your father's estate was shorted over $2 million by William Morrison. Brandon has been accessing those offshore accounts, which makes him liable for receiving stolen property. Add the deception toward you fraud, potentially marriage fraud, and we have grounds for a serious case. Emily leaned forward, her jaw tightening. What do we do? Patricia slid a card across the desk. Agent Jennifer Liu, federal investigator. She's been tracking Morrison's grandson for a while. She needs your cooperation. That afternoon, we sat in a small federal office, blinds drawn against the sun. Agent Liu was younger than I expected, with steady eyes and a calm, deliberate way of speaking. Ms. Collins, she said to Emily, we've been monitoring Brandon Harris for over a year. 2 other families filed complaints. Emma Peterson's and Sarah Mitchell's. We were close to building a case, but lacked a direct confession. That's where you come in." Emily's hands curled into fists. "You want me to bait him?" Lou nodded. "Yes. He'll come back. Men like him always do when they sense they're losing control. When he does act like you, forgive him. Wear a wire. Get him talking about the offshore accounts, his plan, his intent. That confession will nail him." I couldn't help myself. "Isn't that dangerous?" Lou met my eyes. "We'll be watching. She won't be alone." Emily exhaled a long, steady breath. "Then I'll do it." That night back at the beach house, we mapped it out. Emily sat across from me, a notebook open, pen flying, as she listed what she'd say when Brandon returned. "He'll apologize," she murmured. "He always does after an explosion. I'll act like I believe him, like I regret doubting him. Then I'll ask about money, about the accounts, about why he panicked when you sent the gift." Her voice was steady, but I saw the faint tremor in her hand. "You don't have to do this," I said gently. "We could hand the folder to the FBI and step back." She shook her head. "No. He took 2 years of my life, Mom. 2 years of convincing me you were the problem. I won't let him just slink away and start again with another woman. I need to look him in the eye and make him choke on his own lies." For the first time, I saw not just my daughter, but a woman forged by fire. The waiting was the hardest part. 3 days later, a text lit up her phone. "Can we talk? I miss you. Ready to come home?" Emily showed it to me, her lips pressed tight. "This is it." She typed back, hands shaking, but determined. "I miss you too. I'm sorry for doubting you. Let's start fresh." The reply came within minutes. "I'll be home Friday night. Love you." That Friday, we drove back to her apartment. The FBI had already wired the place agents stationed in unmarked cars outside. Agent Lou clipped a small microphone beneath Emily's blouse, her voice calm but firm. "Just be yourself," she said. "Let him do the talking. He'll try to spin, manipulate, control, but eventually he'll brag. They always do." I hugged Emily before stepping back. "If you get scared," she cut me off with a faint smile, "then I'll remember who's in my corner." When she walked inside to wait for him, I stayed in the surveillance van with the agent's headphones clamped over my ears. At 7:43 p.m., the door opened. Brandon's voice, smooth and practiced, spilled into the speakers. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I overreacted. You know it's always us against the world." Emily's voice steady, despite the tremor I knew was in her hands. "I just want to trust you again, Brandon. Tell me the truth." The trap was set. I sat in the surveillance van, headphones pressed tight, my pulse racing with every second that ticked by. Through the tiny microphone clipped under Emily's blouse, her living room filled my ears, every creak of the floorboards, every intake of breath. At 7:43 p.m., the door opened. Brandon's voice floated in smooth as silk. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I was upset, but I love you. You know it's always us against the world." Emily's voice trembled just enough to sound believable. "I just want to trust you again, Brandon. I hate fighting with you." I held my breath. She was good, too good. He set something down on the table, probably flowers or wine, the classic props of a man rehearsing contrition. "Let's start over. Forget all the noise your mother stirred up. We don't need her. We just need each other." Emily let a pause stretch, then said softly, "If that's true, then be honest with me. About everything. The money, the accounts, why you panicked when my mom sent that box?" I gripped the edge of my seat. This was the moment. Brandon laughed, forced and brittle. "Sweetheart, your mother is trying to sabotage us. Those papers don't mean anything." Emily leaned closer. I could hear the faint rustle of fabric. "Then tell me they're lies. Tell me you didn't know about the offshore accounts. Tell me you didn't marry me to get access to what's rightfully mine." Silence. A dangerous silence. Then Brandon exhaled sharply. "Fine. Yes, I knew about the money. My grandfather told me everything before he died. He stole it from your dad, and it's been sitting there for decades. But I wasn't going to let it rot in some dusty account. You and I could have had everything. I married you so we could finally use it together." My heart slammed against my ribs. There it was, the confession. Agent Lou raised her hand, signaling the team, but Emily wasn't finished. Her voice hardened. "So it was never about me. Not really. It was about the inheritance, the beach house, my family's money." Brandon's voice shifted sharp and defensive. "Don't be naive. Marriage is about strategy as much as love. You should be grateful. You were just some overworked marketing exec with no clue how to manage wealth. I was going to build us an empire." Emily's breath hitched, but her words were steady. "You mean build yourself an empire?" That was enough. Lou gave the signal. The door to the apartment burst open, agents flooding the room. FBI hands where we can see them. Through the headphones, chaos erupted, chairs scraping, Brandon shouting in shock. "What the hell is this, Emily? What did you do?" Her voice cut like a blade. I told the truth. I wanted to cheer to rush upstairs, but I stayed rooted in the van as protocol demanded. My chest ached with relief and pride. Minutes later, 2 agents escorted Brandon out in handcuffs. His charm was gone, his polished mask shattered. He looked smaller, meaner, the kind of man who crumbles when the spotlight shifts. He caught sight of the van as they shoved him into the back of a car. For a second, his eyes locked on mine through the glass. Hatred burned there, but beneath it, I saw fear. I didn't flinch. I let him see the steadiness in my gaze, the steadiness of a mother he should never have underestimated. When the door shut and the sirens faded, Emily climbed into the van, pale but standing tall. She collapsed into my arms, shaking with adrenaline. "It's over," she whispered. "No, sweetheart," I murmured, holding her tight. "It's just beginning. Now he answers for everything." Her tears soaked into my shoulder, but this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of release. That night, back at the beach house, we sat on the porch, watching the waves crash under a rising moon. Emily wrapped in a blanket, me with a cup of tea cooling in my hands. For the first time in years, there were no walls between us, only open air, the ocean, and the quiet knowledge that we had faced a predator and won. And though the fight in court still lay ahead, I knew this Brandon Harris's empire of lies had collapsed the moment he opened his mouth. The trap had sprung, and my daughter was free. 6 weeks after the arrest, Emily and I walked up the marble steps of the federal courthouse together. The autumn air was crisp, the kind that smells faintly of wood smoke, but inside my chest the air was tight and heavy. This wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. Brandon had been indicted on multiple charges: conspiracy fraud, money laundering, and marriage fraud. Bail denied. He entered the courtroom in a dark suit that no longer looked polished shackles faint against the carpet, as marshals guided him to the defense table. He glanced back once, searching for Emily's eyes. She didn't flinch. She walked straight to the witness benches with her head high. Patricia Winters met us in the hallway before proceedings began. "Today is about clarity," she reminded Emily. "You don't need to dramatize, just tell the truth. It's powerful enough." Emily nodded, her hands clenched but steady. "I'm ready." Agent Lou squeezed her shoulder. "We're with you, all of us." I stood to the side, watching this circle of women lawyer-agent daughter gathering strength in quiet solidarity. For years, Brandon had tried to convince Emily she was alone. Today, the room itself proved him wrong. The trial began with the prosecutor's opening statement, outlining a pattern of deceit stretching back nearly a decade. Mr. Harris did not stumble into these marriages and engagements, the attorney said, voice firm. He engineered them. He targeted intelligent, financially secure women, isolated them from their families, and attempted to gain access to their assets. This was not love, it was calculated fraud. Then came the witnesses. Emma Peterson was first. She walked to the stand in a navy blazer posture, crisp voice, unwavering. She described the whirlwind romance, the subtle control, the day she found bank transfer forms Brandon had prepared in her name. Next was Sarah Mitchell. Nervous, her voice trembling at first, but steadying as she detailed the way Brandon had discouraged her from visiting her brothers, how he pressured her to add him to her trust fund accounts. The jury listened rapt. A pattern was emerging. Then it was Emily's turn. My daughter walked to the witness box and swore the oath. For a moment she looked so young again, the girl who once clutched seashells with sandy fingers at the Cape Cod shore. But when she began to speak, her voice carried the weight of a woman who had clawed her way out of deception. She told them about the charm, the compliments, the way Brandon framed distance from me as healthy boundaries. She explained how traditions turned into patterns, how love became a leash. And then she told them about the emails, the offshore accounts, the screaming match after he opened the wedding gift. Mr. Harris didn't just steal money, Emily said, looking directly at the jury. He tried to steal my relationship with my mother. He made me believe that cutting her out of my life was strength, when it was the opposite, his way of making me vulnerable. He thought he could silence me. He thought I'd be too ashamed to admit how easily I was manipulated. He was wrong. Her voice didn't waver. My throat ached with pride. The defense attorney tried to spin it, painting Brandon as a misguided man who loved too intensely. But then Agent Lou took the stand, presenting recorded audio from the night of the sting. Brandon's own voice filled the courtroom. "Yes, I knew about the money. I married you so we could finally use it together." There was no spinning that. The jury's faces hardened. When court adjourned for the day, Emily returned to the benches where I waited. She sank beside me, exhaling long and shaky. "You were incredible," I whispered, squeezing her hand. She shook her head. I was terrified. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," I said gently. "It's speaking anyway." Across the aisle, Emma and Sarah joined us, forming a small circle of quiet strength. No applause, no theatrics, just women who had carried scars too long finally laying them down together. As we left the courthouse into the fading light, I looked at my daughter walking between me and two women who had once been strangers. Different paths, same story. Brandon had thought he was clever, but his own victims had become his undoing. The sentencing was still weeks away, but in my heart, justice had already begun. Not because of the charges or the courtroom spectacle, but because Emily had found her voice again. And once truth has been spoken aloud, it can never be silenced. The final day of the trial dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself understood what was about to happen. Emily and I walked into the courthouse side by side, our footsteps echoing across marble floors. Neither of us spoke. Words felt too fragile for what was coming. Inside, the courtroom hummed with anticipation. Emma Peterson sat 2 rows ahead, Sarah Mitchell just behind her. We exchanged small nods, each of us carrying the same nervous hope. Brandon was led in wearing the same suit he had worn all week, though it hung loose now, his face drawn and pale. For once, the charm was gone. The judge called the session to order and the jury filed in. 12 strangers who had listened to every detail, studied every piece of evidence, weighed every lie. My chest tightened as the foreman stood. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty. On the charge of money laundering, guilty. On the charge of marriage fraud with intent to commit larceny, guilty. Each word landed like a stone sinking into deep water. Brandon flinched but kept his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. The judge's voice carried steady authority. "Mr. Brandon Harris, you have been found guilty on all counts. This court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay restitution to the victims totaling $8 million. There was a collective exhale in the room. Not cheers, not applause, just the quiet release of people who had been holding their breath for too long. I felt Emily's hand squeeze mine. Her shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in relief. Before the judge closed proceedings, Emily rose. She had prepared a victim impact statement, though I knew how much it had cost her to write it. She walked to the front paper, trembling in her hands, and faced the man who had stolen 2 years of her life. "Brandon Harris didn't just try to steal money," she began, voice clear and steady. "He stole trust. He isolated me from the one person who had always stood by me, my mother. He convinced me that love meant obedience, that strength meant silence. But here's what he didn't understand. Silence is temporary. Truth always finds a way through. He thought he was clever enough to erase my past, but all he did was remind me of where my strength comes from." Her eyes flicked toward me briefly, then back to him. "I am not your victim. I am the woman who stopped you, and I will make sure you never hurt anyone else again." The room was utterly silent. Even the judge seemed to pause, letting the words settle. Brandon shifted in his chair, eyes darting, but he said nothing. When Emily finished, she folded the paper, walked back to her seat, and sat beside me. Her hand found mine again, and I squeezed it, pride surging so strong I thought my chest might break. The judge gavelled the session closed. Court is adjourned. Brandon was led away in chains, his footsteps heavy against the floor. Watching him disappear through that side door, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something deeper: justice. Not vengeance, not gloating, just the quiet certainty that truth had done what it always does in the end. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, microphones flashing, cameras snapping. Emma, Sarah, and Emily stood together, a united front. None of them wanted publicity, but their presence alone told a story: women who refused to stay silent, women who had reclaimed their voices. I hung back, letting them have their moment. My daughter didn't need me to shield her anymore. She was strong enough to face the world herself. But when she finally broke away from the reporters and came back to me, I opened my arms wide. She stepped into them without hesitation, resting her head against my shoulder, like she had when she was small. "It's over, Mom," she whispered. I kissed her hair. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over." That night, we drove home in quiet peace. No frantic phone calls, no manipulative texts, no threats lurking in the shadows. Just the sound of the road beneath our tires and the knowledge that we had faced the storm and come through together. When we reached the beach house, the waves were rolling in under a silver moon. Emily walked down to the sand barefoot, staring out at the horizon. I followed our footprints side by side. Brandon Harris had thought he was writing the final chapter of her story. Instead, she had claimed the pen back. And as I stood there with the daughter I had nearly lost, I knew this wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of something far stronger than betrayal, a future built on truth, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. The courthouse faded into memory faster than I expected. No more reporters outside our door, no more late-night calls from lawyers, no more adrenaline pumping through my veins every time my phone buzzed. For the first time in years, the silence in my home felt like peace instead of punishment. Emily stayed at the beach house with me for a few weeks after the trial. At first, she moved through the rooms like a shadow-quiet tentative, as though afraid she didn't belong here anymore. I didn't push. I let her settle back in slowly, like the tide reclaiming the shore, one gentle wave at a time. One morning, I found her in the attic, surrounded by dusty boxes. She was thumbing through an old photo album, the corners of the pages curled with age. Pictures of summers past spilled across her lap in pigtails building sandcastles, me holding her hand as we waded into the surf. She looked up, eyes glistening. "I don't deserve this house. Not after the things I said. Not after—" Her voice broke. I sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Sweetheart, this house isn't about deserving. It's about memory, about roots. And nothing you said under his influence could erase the years we built together here." She leaned into me, her tears dampening my sleeve. "How do you forgive me so easily?" "Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting," I whispered. "It's about choosing love over bitterness. And I'd rather have you back than hold on to pain." In the evenings, we cooked together again. Simple meals, my lasagna, her roasted vegetables, bread rising slow in the oven. We ate on the porch, listening to the ocean, our laughter hesitant at first, then freer as the days passed. One night, Emily put down her fork and looked at me with that fierce spark I'd thought I'd lost forever. "Mom, I want to use the settlement money for something real, not just to patch my pride. Something that helps women like Emma and Sarah like me. Maybe a fund, maybe workshops. Something that says you're not alone and you don't have to stay silent." I studied her across the table, the candlelight flickering against her determined face. For the first time, she wasn't speaking as someone who had been broken. She was speaking as someone who had survived and wanted to help others do the same. "I think your father would be proud," I said softly. "And so am I." Healing wasn't linear. Some nights Emily still woke trembling, haunted by dreams of Brandon's voice whispering poison in her ear. She'd pad down the hallway, curl up on the couch, and I'd sit beside her until dawn, stroking her hair the way I had when she was small. Other mornings I'd catch her staring out at the sea, shoulders squared as though daring the world to try to break her again. We talked more than we ever had, about her regrets, about my mistakes too, about the fragile, messy way love works between mothers and daughters. She told me how ashamed she felt for doubting me. I told her shame had no place here. We both cried, we both laughed. We stitched something new out of the tatters. One Saturday, we hosted Emma and Sarah at the beach house. The four of us sat on the deck with coffee mugs, the air salt-sweet, the sound of gulls overhead. There was no talk of Brandon, just stories, recipes, hopes. Women who had once been victims now sat as allies, breathing freely again. Emily turned to me afterward, her voice soft but certain. "This is what I want, Mom. Spaces like this, where women can come together, share, and heal." I nodded, my heart swelling. "Then we'll build it, right here if we have to. Let the beach house be more than a memory. It can be a haven." That evening, after they left, Emily and I walked the shoreline barefoot. The sun slipped low, painting the horizon in pinks and golds. She reached for my hand just as she used to when she was a little girl afraid of the waves. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. "You never did," I said. "You just wandered. And now you found your way back." She smiled through her tears, and for the first time I believed we weren't just surviving the aftermath. We were building something new, something stronger. The storm had passed, and in its quiet wake we had found not just justice, but each other. The seasons turned slowly after the trial, each wave washing away a little more of the pain we had carried. Life didn't return to what it once was, because it couldn't, but it settled into something gentler, something real. And maybe that was better. Emily and I rebuilt, not with grand gestures, but with everyday moments. She moved back into her condo in Boston, but came to the beach house every weekend. We planted roses in the garden together, painted the shutters a cheerful blue, and filled the kitchen with the smell of bread rising. Each laugh we shared was like a brick laid into the foundation of trust we had once lost. But the greatest change wasn't in the house. It was in us. One afternoon, as we sorted through old photographs for a memory wall, Emily grew quiet. She picked up a picture of herself at 12, grinning wide with sand clinging to her sunburned cheeks. "I wish I could go back," she whispered. "Tell that little girl not to forget her mom, not to let anyone convince her otherwise." I set the picture back in her hand. "Sweetheart, you can't rewrite the past. But you can honor it by living differently now, by refusing to let shame or regret keep you silent." Her eyes glistened, but she nodded. "I'm trying. Some days I still hear his voice in my head, telling me you were holding me back." "And what do you hear now?" I asked gently. She smiled faintly. "Yours. Telling me I was worth fighting for." That was enough. Forgiveness didn't come all at once. It arrived in small pieces like sea glass scattered along the shore. Emily had to forgive herself for believing Brandon's lies. I had to forgive her for the words she spoke when she was blinded by him. And though it surprised even me, I had to find a way to forgive Brandon, not for his sake, but for mine. Hatred is a heavy stone. Carry it long enough and it crushes you. I refused to let him have that power. So when people asked how I felt about him being in prison, I told them the truth. I wasn't celebrating. I was simply free. Together, Emily and I started something new. The Haven at Cape Cod, a small space in the beach house where women could gather, share stories, and rebuild their lives after betrayal. Emma and Sarah were the first to visit. Soon others joined, women carrying different scars, but bound by the same truth. None of us had to walk through pain alone. We called our first workshop Family Betrayal Stories from Silence to Strength. It wasn't about reopening wounds. It was about showing that wounds could heal and that healing was even stronger when shared. Watching Emily lead a circle of women, her voice steady and kind, filled me with awe. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was a survivor who had turned her story into light for others. One evening, long after everyone had left, Emily and I sat on the porch, watching the sun slip into the horizon. The sky burned orange and gold waves whispering against the shore. She reached for my hand. "Do you ever wish it had all been different?" she asked softly. I thought about that for a long moment. No. Because if it had been different, maybe we wouldn't be here, stronger, closer, wiser. Pain shaped us, but it didn't define us. Forgiveness did. She leaned her head on my shoulder. For the first time in years, I felt complete. If you're listening to this, maybe you've faced something similar. Maybe you know too well how it feels to be cut out by someone you love, to be told you don't matter, to feel the sting of betrayal. Family betrayal stories are never easy to tell. But here's what I've learned. Betrayal doesn't get the last word. Truth does, forgiveness does, love does. And if you're carrying hurt tonight, please know you are not alone. As I close this chapter of my life, I do so with gratitude. For the daughter who found her way back, for the women who turned their silence into solidarity, and for the lesson that George Eliot once wrote, "It is never too late to be what you might have been." Emily and I aren't victims anymore. We are exactly who we were always meant to be: resilient, forgiving, and free. So thank you for walking with us through the story. If it touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, I ask you to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me your story, because your voice matters. This isn't just the end of one story, it's the beginning of many. And together we'll keep reminding the world betrayal may bruise us, but love and forgiveness will always be stronger.